as technology would be called later on. If we look at how from the poetics or poetry, or the interesting thing is that the poien in Greek means to make, to create, to compose, to let something to emerge. And then if you put those things together, so the poetic technologies would be exactly that, something that allows us to kind of structurally bring something forward and bring something into being that doesn't exist yet. But how do we do that? And here I want to introduce an interesting point maybe. In the late 70s, the biologist Lynn Margulis proposed this idea of symbiosis, and somehow to contradict the Darwinian theories, and saying that actually, if you look at the biological development of the world, different microorganisms, rather than competing between themselves, actually work together, and that's how the evolution happens. So if I go to the next slide, so then from there is another interesting term, which is sympoiesis, or which comes from the Greek, which means making with. And that's a concept which derives from this biological research, scientific research, and has been recently used to somehow oppose the other notion that is very rooted in the West, especially of autopoiesis, that things somehow emerge autonomously, and rather to outline this idea of making with. So what we have been doing here is actually to somehow bring that to life. And if we, here by any media necessary, here are some of the images from what we have done in these last days. So we have arrived here a week ago. We have completed a phase. This is the third time we're here on St. Vincent. We have been together with Samuel and Quentin to the prisons, and James, of course, to the prisons in St. Vincent. We have introduced and coached the prisoners, some of the inmates, on how to use a specific printer that we brought here. And then we have done other actions. We have talked with them also and introduced this other interesting machine, which helps to recycle plastic and transform it into a 3D filament that then can be used to 3D print different objects. And then another project that we will develop, and we're developing together with St. Vincent Prison, that's a spirulina growing farm that will be installed there. And then to summarize, and I will then pass the word to my guests here, is that these poetic technologies that we're testing here in St. Vincent are all meant to create a kind of a circular economy networks, which we're testing here, but which can be then implemented elsewhere. So it is not a matter of any of us kind of shining out singularly, but it is creating this kind of collective networks of collaboration, which for the moment we have also called this attempt a survival kit collection. So far we have tested here in St. Vincent several of these poetic tools or poetic technological tools, such as visual assemblies. Visual assemblies, that's a tool developed by Nika, sort of artistic tool through which you can community plan various aspects of the community life, be it public space or use of public space or other things. The 3D printing, that's an important tool. And through 3D printing, if in this case, we connected inmates with another institution, the Voice of the Disabled. And so these machines will not just be used like randomly, but they will benefit the various and different communities that we're also attempting to put in contact here on the island. The recycling process of plastics in this case, and the playground project that we worked with before, and which is also how to render architecture accessible. And this is something that we tried here. And so as David Graeber wanted, so he emphasized that today we are in this phase where a lot of bureaucratic mechanisms are put into kind of action to prevent us from being able to use some of the technologies or to limit our access or usership of these technologies. And today, I think all of the guests and all the people here around me are someone who each, who will present and explain what we have done here on the ground, but each one of them operate with these poetic technologies to one extent or another. And then, of course, since it is an assembly, I would invite also the guests or the participants online to join us and to kind of share your opinion, your ideas about what new technologies we could introduce. And yeah, and then make a collective kind of discussion and assembly out of it. So I would pass the floor now. I'll go out of my presentation. I'll stop sharing the screen. And I'll pass the floor to my colleagues here. So I would go with Samuel, and I would pass him the headphones. And Samuel, maybe you could briefly introduce what your company is doing. So Samuel is working. Maybe you could self-present yourself. This will be easier since we have one set of headphones. Yeah. But then, yeah, and then we can ask to Sam some of the questions and so on and so forth. So maybe just very briefly. So,
hello, everyone. Can you hear me all right? So my name is Samuel Foulkes. I'm the Director of Braille Production at Clovernook Center for the Blind. Clovernook is a nonprofit located in the United States. We are a Braille producer, so we are actually the largest volume producer of Braille in the world. We print about 30 million pages a year. Most of that is for the Library of Congress, so we produce a lot of the accessible books and magazines for various federal programs that place Braille into libraries and send it directly to individuals. And for most of our 122-year history, we have really just printed Braille. And it's only been in the last 2 years that we have, in the last 10 years, that we've started to look at how emerging technologies can benefit people who are blind or low vision and the disability space more broadly. So to that end, we launched a global impact and global education program. What that program looks to do is to place inexpensive technology that can have an outsized positive social impact on the disability community in that space. And that's all grounded in this idea that some of you may be familiar with of the social model of disability. So if you're not familiar, basically what that posits is that, as opposed to the medical term of disability, that there's something wrong with you, that there's something physically or otherwise, that is non-normal. The social model of disability posits that it is really that a lot of disability experience is a design issue. So someone who's in a wheelchair that shows up to a building where there are only stairs, the stairs are disabling, it's not a wheelchair. Someone who's blind is just as capable as someone who's sighted as accessing education, enjoying themselves at a museum and interacting with every aspect of life, ordering food at a restaurant like the one we're sitting in right now. But the way that we design our systems and services and products, they disable people. We only have print menus. We don't provide accessible learning materials in schools. And so that's the perspective that we take on this global program, is placing tools and equipment in different places that can start to make a positive social impact to address that historical and present day imbalance. So to that end, our program works on placing Braille and 3D production equipment in different spaces around the world. And that started in Kenya. We've now placed printers in Ghana and South Africa and Vietnam. And this week here in St. Vincent, what each of these projects is looking to do is to connect an organization that's interested in social impact with a disability organization that is doing work on the ground. So not printing things in the US and shipping them halfway around the world, but rather giving people the tools and the resources to learn how to use them and to produce things in the community for the community. So I'm going to pass things over here in just a minute to my colleague Quentin, just to give you a couple minutes overview of what the training looks like this week. I will say it's the first time that we've also placed a bottle recycling component too, which we're very excited about at Clovernook because it adds a whole nother layer of environmental responsibility onto this already socially impacting program. So linking with Andris and James and the rest of the Graeber Institute team has been quite rewarding, as they've been very encouraging in us placing this printer and doing trainings through this week, and then linking that group to Voice of the Disabled here in St. Vincent, who they will be the ones who decide, what is printed, right? So it's meeting community needs where they'll prioritize it, what they could use either from an educational standpoint or a cultural standpoint or a daily living standpoint. And we'll design and provide files for the printing group to print. It's a really neat little pipeline. So I'm going to pass things over now to my colleague Quentin. We'll just give you a couple highlights of the week and the technical aspects of the training.
Maybe can I interfere? Can I interfere quickly?
Yes, Nika,
Andris?
please.
Yeah, I just want to ask Ronnie, I see him here, and describe how the process was going with this machine that shredded plastic. Because Andris, it was our trip before to St. Vincent. I think the second one, no, the first one, when we went to the Sandy Bay community.
Yes.
So it was this, Ronnie, are you here? Maybe you can talk about this. So it was the community who live on the other part of the island, and they were really poor, and all the beaches are trashed with plastic bottles, and they were like asking us how we can help. Like we're like, white rich people coming to this place, and they were like listing us a lot of things we have to do for them. And the most forcefully one, they were asking us to get rid of their plastic trash. And we were like, oh, how can we do that? Sorry, let's we don't know how, kind of forget about that. And then suddenly with the 3D printer, next time we came, we find out, it exists this machine that's actually produce the stuff that's 3D printing using as a material from the shredded plastic bottle. And somebody in Poland is selling this machine for quite cheap and explaining how they work. And that's what we showed last time in the prison. And the Polish guy also sent us a presentation in which he described how he's printing from this plastic trash, he's printing a crunch, that the people use crunches that cost to print, I think $3 or $5, but in the shop it's cost $200. That was super excited for the prison administration. And then we are very happy that now we have almost a full cycle. And I think this is really cool. It's almost Malevich and additional elements, when the different people build something that not only about technology, but understand technology as social relationship, as this kind of disaster and this beautiful island with a lot of plastic trash, and then somebody from other part of the world coming and saying, oh, actually it's easy to solve and you can make money out of that even. And so that's actually what is what we find really beautiful. So sorry for interruption.
Thank you, Nika. So Ronnie, would you like to intervene or should?
Oh, Andris, good evening, colleagues. No, I'm not in a position to chat. I'm back at my desk at work. But I think Nika has done a beautiful job of the description of our meeting last year, sorry, in Sandy Bay. But I'm not in a position now to elaborate. I'm back at my work desk.
Okay, so thank you anyway, Ronnie, for being with us today. And Ronnie is someone who has coordinated our visits here in St. Vincent. Before we proceed, I also wanted to thank all the wonderful people at the David Graeber Institute who made this meeting possible. So Koshika, Shlomo, everyone, thank you so much, Varya, for guiding us all the week through this. So maybe now, Quentin, you could just explain us. Thank you, Nika. So yes, it is our third visit, but maybe Quentin, you can just explain what we have done in the prison and so that we have a little bit more kind of practical touch of what you can do actually with this technology that now has become so accessible.
Yeah, so what we did was we placed a low-cost 3D printer, a 3D printer that can actually do multiple colors like this sign. So it can do up to 4 colors. And we went over the basics on how to set up prints, send prints, and remove prints so that they can do that themselves. We also went over some of the practical designs that could be made, like the model of a heart that is able to be disassembled into 4 pieces for just some biology examples for students who are blind or low vision to actually get a good sense of what things are supposed to look like. The first print that we had them do was of this, which doesn't come through great, but this is 1/2.
The map of St. Vincent.
Yep.
That's a map of St. Vincent.
And it goes together in 2 halves.
So it is hard to see maybe because it is black.
What?
Nika, I think you have to mute yourself, sorry.
We see it. We see it. We see it. I get a
Okay,
feeling.
great. Okay. Yes. So these are the things that we've done there. Thank you. And apart that, we also had a series of meetings, and then James hosted that. Thank you for doing that. Just maybe James can say.
Hi, hello everybody. Yes, so we hosted the first meeting where Brian Eno and Cory Doctorow were online. They weren't with us, but they were with us digitally while we were in the prison after the second workshop that the guys here from Clovernook delivered. And while we were beginning that meeting, they were printing off, this was being printed off from the 3D printer. It takes quite a long time. It's about 6 hours, something for a piece like this. Lots of detail. Their one they're printing though, they were designing themselves. It was extremely nice to see. The inmates were on the software. Quentin had shown them sufficiently well that they were just coloring in the different bits themselves, and the prison guards were getting involved, and they also wanted to get their hands on the software. And there was a very sweet moment where, let's say, the one prison guard and one inmate who knows the most or is the most advanced in 3D printing were there discussing with one another the different things that they wanted to print with the machine and how that could connect to different use cases around the island. So it was a really nice moment of leveling people to the same place where they could then share their ideas that they had for practical applications, like the one that Samuel was just presenting with the connection with the Voice of the Disabled group here on the island. So them producing things. And then we had some other meetings online throughout the week on this theme of poetic technologies and the relationship between poetic technologies and the disaster that we know that we're facing, but how we can practically see our way through. And this is one small example, a little prototype, a test, as Andris was saying, that moves us forward in that.
Okay, thank you, James. And maybe now what we could do is that I've invited some of the guests, because I think if what emerged, what was very interesting, that there were some of the very interesting lectures in the previous days about how we could interpret or what these poetic technologies could be from a more theoretical standpoint. But today we have together with us some of the guests and some of the people who have also practiced and worked with communities, and also on the ground we did a very hands-on work. So how do we actually can put these technologies and in action, and how can we sort of realize them on ground through various like kind of communities, activist circles, artistic circles. When we speak about these technologies, usually in the West, we always think about some kind of complicated tools, but in this case, as Nika mentioned, these technologies serve then to activate wider social processes. And so maybe I would now like to ask to my colleagues, Zasha, who is working with Zasha Colah. She's a curator, an organizer, writer. She works more with the field which is related to the visual arts, and she has curated the last Berlin Biennale. And her colleague, Valentina Viviani, so Zasha comes from India, and Zasha has worked there also with one of the projects, which was called the Clark House Initiative, which was actually, I would also define that as sort of a poetic technology, because it was bringing different communities together. It became this space of aggregation, and the space through which Zasha built a quite extensive network of various collaborations on many levels. And the same with Valentina. They operated recently in Berlin. They were both curating the Berlin Biennale, the 13th edition, which was a kind of complicated context in which to work in. And they developed also some kind of ideas or tools how to deal with or how to work and survive with a context where the censorship now is kind of a serious part of this, sort of really determining what can and cannot be shown, even if officially it doesn't exist in that context. But there are certain rules which sort of really very much sort of preclude and determine what can be shown and what can be talked about or not. So maybe, Zasha, you could talk about the exhibition making or your practice a little bit, if we look at it through this lens of being also a kind of poetic technology. So I would pass the floor to Zasha Colah from India, and to Valentina, who is originally from Argentina, but now is joining us from Europe.
Thanks.
Thank
It's very kind of you to think of Clark House, which was 12 years of collaboration as a poetic technology, but that makes a lot of sense to me. While working on the Berlin Biennial, we slowly, in our discussions with artists, started to use the word technology, because of course, this is a word Germans love. You know, every journalist would love to hear about the latest technology that, is being used, and this, and what artists were working on, and how science was a part of it. And what was coming instead from the artists was ideas quite different to this. And it was, how can we find a technology to slow down time, to slow down the present? And the answer that Valentina and I, with, I would say, all these artists we were in constant dialogue with, started to come up with, was the idea that the exhibition for us was not a medium so much as a technology. So in the time of AI, where decision making is aided, and in a ghastly way, we were looking at Pegasus and studying, how decision making, where you bomb, how quickly you bomb. These questions that normally would take 2 weeks to answer were now happening in seconds, because the information about where to bomb would happen in seconds. And so this is the way that AI is driving decision making. So finally, it's a human decision, but it's speeded up to an incredible level. So what we were wondering is, what are the technologies remaining, or what are the technologies being invented to do an opposite process? And I remember speaking with doctors and medical professionals, and really, I I don't think anyone was asking this question because everything was about speeding up decision making and the time for decision making. And so the exhibition, the way we set it out, the biennial was as a kind of not really slapstick, but like a funny way to jar and break, the way people come to their answers, and come to their decisions on things. And we tried to do this through the display itself and through the works themselves. And some of them, for example, just to ride on what you've been showing at St. Vincent, which amazes me, and I love it because firstly we did have a lot of works that we showed coming out of the prisons in this biennial. So we were wondering, okay, what does one do with bare life? With when all you have sometimes is the body and time. Can one still be an artist and make work? And what kind of work would that look? What would that look like? And can one put it on display? Because this is exactly the work that doesn't have an exhibition history, doesn't have books. Why? Because there's no visual documentation. It has oral documentation, and it comes to us through anecdotes. And so our exhibition was, I think, in a way, a theoretical, stake in the stand for orality, and what that is today. How that is so contemporary today, and not push it into some vague idea of folk art ritual. I don't know. I'm really so fed up with that way of looking at the world, and it's, to me, over. And this was really our way of saying that orality maybe is the technology of our choice with Valentina that we were really focusing on. And it is not related only to the mouth, of course, and speech. Orality has always been accompanied, when it's possible, by scrolls, by boxes that open, story, the ability to improvise on. And what orality seems to be able to transmit are things that come out of prisons, things that have, or that are made within a protest, or that are made on the street at a certain moment, these fugitive practices. And so this was the impetus of the biennial. And then, for instance, the one work which was this massive 3D printing Borromean knot done by the artist Milica Tomic, who I have huge respect for as a thinker, fellow conversationalist. So she was making these Borromean knots to talk about trauma, to talk about genocide. It was her way to understand the current genocide in Palestine and the Bosnian genocide that her whole life has been, occupied with, and her whole adult life. And so she was looking at these Borromean knots and they made them into, which her mother had also stitched as a kind of oral technology, again, as forms of macrame. But that had really become weirder
Makes
than
sense.
any macrame, where threads would sometimes just hang. It was really a trauma on display. And so she picks out one of these Borromean knots and makes it enormous. One of the knots that is maybe most indefinable, that is just trauma speaking. But she makes it huge and prints it with a 3D printing method in Graz, the university, where they're inventing a new form of cement, which is aided by mycelium. So the way that something that is many times stronger than cement, it's still in experimental phases, but it's stronger than steel reinforced cement. It is by feeding this 3D printing bodies with mycelium, feeding it for some weeks and then fixing and stopping the growth at some point. So we were constantly feeding this little animal Borromean knot, and it would not look to anyone, because then it looks like this big mushroom. It would not look like the latest in technology. It doesn't have the gloss, it doesn't have the finish. We're going to mycelium, something really underground, and goes back to your Donna Haraway and your microcosms. And I think that was the kind of technologies, whether coming out of prisons or coming out of a university department, that were really attractive to me, to us. I
Zasha, can I
wanted to
ask you something?
say, yes.
Yeah, so the other notion that you used for your Biennale was this idea of fugitivity. So how could you use fugitivity? Because that is also something that is frequently used as a kind of a strategy today, and which could be turned into a kind of strategy. And I really love this idea of slowing down the time, because the community work also requires, community work is never quick, never instant. It requires, like, we're here for the third time, so it always requires a kind of constant care and constant, let's say, intervention and then follow up. So how did you work with those themes also in your Biennale?
I mean, fugitivity is, of course, very much theorized in Black aesthetics, etc. It's also became, as I have to speak now personally, it became in India and as part of Clark House, which was a very, I have to say, what kept Clark House together was because it was in a movement in some way. It was a political idea that kept us all together for 12 years. But there was, because there were no finances to speak of, it was all gift exchange and barter, and quite interesting economically. But having said that, what maybe kept the glue was the political feeling that we all shared. And when the Modi BJP government came into power, of course, fugitivity became not some aesthetic idea, but something we had to actually do. This was always a part of Clark House's activities. Our very first exhibition, we had a police car standing outside, and we were told that if the artist made this performance we were planning on the street, he would be arrested. We managed to do it. So, of course, we were always using fugitivity, but it really took on another level for us with the BJP government. And I'm thinking now of technologies. This is where some of the programmers who we knew, who were always around, but, taking a back seat on everything, not the artist up front and center. These became the silent and very quiet, very undercover heroes of that moment, because, along with different research libraries, etc., that were saving, for example, what had happened with the Gujarat riots, the whole archive. These archives are tenacious, they are explosive. No one should know they exist till the time is right. How does one keep them, and where does one keep them? These, and I cannot reveal much, but these are the kind of people who then, made things like Polis Project, or made through technology, made alternative circulations possible. So when journalists were losing their job in every single paper, something like a Polis Project could come up, and it could only be safe because of the digital know-how of some of our colleagues and friends in this circuit, but also how to keep certain archives safe. And when I think about arg.fail, that closed in 2024, I really think technology, for me, something is really broken. I don't know, how. So that kind of use of the law is something in the Berlin Biennial, this kind of ferocious use of the law against free speech was something we were really up against with the Berlin Biennial, and when fugitivity was not appreciated, I have to say. Everyone was very critical to the use of fugitivity, which I do not understand, because it was either they say they live in a democracy, which is what many of my biggest, harshest critics believe they do. And if they do live in this perfect democracy, then there's no room for fugitivity. This is the line of argument. I disagree completely.
Yeah.
I'd let Valentina speak, otherwise I can go on.
Yeah,
No,
exactly.
it's fine.
So maybe Valentina, you could also like a little bit focus on this notion that Zasha said about this
Yeah.
circularity and yeah, thanks.
And I mean, following on what Zasha was saying, I think the idea of the idealization of what a democratic field to work, for example, in the cultural field of knowledge and the circulation was very strange. So we have to face also that and the expectations of what political art is and what is expected. And then to really trust and enter in conversation with what many artists were doing and have been doing under strict censorships, and also these subtle silencing governments. I mean, I'm actually now speaking from Argentina, which, as Sasha was mentioning, also Indian, and we see this happening in a lot of democracies, and then how the artists have responded, and when we think of technologies, maybe it's not from the economic side of it, but we were also talking about languages. So what are the languages in which these artists are working? So what emerges from not a proper position of an artist, but from an urgency or to respond to power, to pass on with bare life, for example, from prison, on also artists from indigenous communities that are in danger. So we would have not only like the actual digital technologies, but also very I don't know how to say, like textile, for example, like artists weaving stories of justice in textile and coding those, or artists, for example, here in Argentina responding to economical crisis, with this huge bra that now has 30 years later been remade, and how this comes as and humor comes also in many of the artistic strategies. And I think it is also, I mean, not to overuse the idea of technology, but how the idea of humor in which artists have to be really aware of the environment or ecosystem they're working in. So in this idea of symbiosis, I think it's like understanding a language, a cultural code, and what would arrive to the fellow citizens. So not just to the public, but and how that reverberates and mocks power. So it's kind of claiming back a certain strength, a certain political position and a message that it's contagious in a good way, and that speaks on that level. And I think that really came across a lot of the works, and what I really also appreciate that these allowed us to create, or that the mapping of the different geographies and times of the biennial, of the artists present in the biennial, emerged by itself, like in a very organic manner. So we have incredible links with not only the Lithium Triangle in Argentina, but also Congo, Sudan, Zambia, and then, for example, Serbia, and many other countries or territories that are linked in those kind of extractivism processes and reacting or working against with indigenous communities, with students, and so on. And the idea of humor across the time and space, for example, Poland, Myanmar, Argentina, and many other areas. And it was incredible to see that emerge and read or interpret and try to find these technologies that are, I think, as Sasha was saying, the orality and how contemporary they are, and how they allow these ideas of course, ephemerality, the fugitivity, not in the sense of the fugitive per se, but the ideas that flee or are able to hide in, for example, in the case of Berlin, how would we name the genocide when we were not allowed to use the word genocide, and how artists would articulate this word. And I think the idea of poetic, because I think there were expectations that these would be articulated in one way, and because it wasn't, it was confusing for some people. But then there was the poetics of the artist to name the unnameable, to to find a way to be like this fox or this fugitive, and really expect that it passes on, that people get it, that I don't know, I think it has a lot of it was very courageous from them to open to put these ideas, and I hope it also becomes a strategy that we can use, because more and more our so-called democracies are legitimating, illegally but legitimating censorship. So I think it was a lot of learning from us, and for us, sorry. And I will stop here because as Zasha, I could go on.
Thank you. And maybe to those of you who are thinking what kind of link there is with the art, if you look at this slide that I showed you before, what art or this idea of technique is coming actually, or it was closely linked with the art. So art was one of the first technologies that we were using, and then it was developed only in the 17th century or so, and turned actually in English language, there's no distinction between the technical aspect or technique, like in German, and the technology, which we see as kind of tools. But yeah, in music, like art, those were the first technologies that people were really like kind of exercising. Through exercise, they rendered the bodies able to kind of reproduce something that the others could not. So maybe that's a thread. And that makes also this idea of technology less abstract. Like this is not something outside of us, but maybe this is also something like that starts with our bodies and that can be embodied as well. And that's maybe, therefore, I would like to ask to Giacomo to very briefly, Giacomo, we did something quite extraordinary some years ago, because we created within the university where I teach, so we created a fake department, which is called Critical Studies Department. And what is interesting that for the moment, the David Graeber Institute is also existing more or less virtually. We do not have yet an official ability to release diplomas, but what has this been created is a kind of a network, which is really international, of different knowledges that come together. And even if we don't have a license yet, it actually like really strongly exists, and look how many people it brings together. So maybe Giacomo, can you are you on? Yes, you are, Giacomo.
Yeah,
okay, so maybe, you can just tell us a little bit about that experience, and then very shortly, like what is your artistic practice and how it sort of...
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So I'm very happy to meet you all. And since quite a long time has passed now, Critical Studies Department was a fake department. And it was this group of students that was born during pandemic. And basically it was this auto-organized group in which we started thinking what was education, especially during pandemic time, since it was online, the one direction. So these already prepared lessons that students need to consume in somehow. So we started this process that lasts a couple of years. And it was quite interesting because we started also from these ideas of symbiont. So we were inside the institution, but we were a fake department, and mostly we were working in both sides, inside the university as students, but also outside as an independent collective group. Maybe there were one project that we did that touched me a lot. It's this project that we did in Zagreb. So because it was one of the main project that we develop, and also it lasts quite a lot of time. So we won this scholarship. So outside the institution, so it was also important for us to have the space and the time and the energy to work outside. And we created this relation with the Academy of Fine Art of Zagreb. We made this kind of enlarged group because, of course, it was a non-hierarchic group. So there was a lot of confusion in the first time on how to manage the project and but it was really interesting also to touch, no, with the hand the process of the decision making. And this takes a lot of time, but give us the perspective on what does it mean to work collectively. And yeah, we started working also with the assemblies. And what we did basically in Zagreb was this kind of exchange with the Academy of Fine Arts. And but we were facing also the issue of education. So the project was called An Education. That was an ambivalent term that means the opposite of education, but also an as a possibility or something different. So basically, we made this open call to the students, both of NABA Academy and the Academy of Fine Arts in Zagreb, to make a proposal for one poster. And we designed this nomad exhibition in which we printed all the poster that we collected from the students, and the poster was like a format that it's not random, but it's because it was very easy in that time to shared, and it was like a common language that in which everyone could explain their own idea about education. So we received very heterogeneous material. Some of them was like just a sentence, other was drawing. So it was really interesting to see the different proposal. And we went there, and I remember that we hold these meetings that was talking about radical pedagogies, if you remember, Andris, with also Anna Devic and other guests, and Marco Tadic also. And so we had this one talk in the beginning of our residency that was like 2 weeks. And at the
I'm
end,
sorry if I interrupt you, because
yeah.
I think we will also then run out of time otherwise. But I think it was also not just like a kind of random project, but I think what was important about it, it was like giving you the agency, like as students, also to determine or to self-determine your own kind of educational path. And I think that's what maybe we can now open the floor up to. We have mentioned like many different things, and I was trying to think about them, all of them, as different poetic technologies. And maybe I would give or come back to Nika. So I think the Institute actually, if we really think about it, is working in all these different fields. So there are many, many projects that we are having, Museum of Care, now the David Graeber Institute, and all of these projects in one or another way are kind of tools that can really be used by people in order to have or to claim back this agency of actually being able. I think the problem with the technologies is like that lately we have less and less agency of usership. And what we are trying to promote through the Institute is rather kind of how to open up technologies that would enforce or allow this usership and collaboration. And so maybe Nika and everyone else, can we maybe start a kind of open discussion and about if we are kind of going or bringing this discussion in a totally wrong direction, or maybe what other people have found out or think about how these technologies could be developed and what these technologies mean. So Nika or anyone?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you, Andris, for like excellent final discussion of our St Vincent trip this time. And maybe I can just share my concern also in why I started to think about technology in the first place. So first of all, I'm the daughter of Soviet engineers. So technology and sci-fi and all of this was very, very close to me. And the second things, when we just met with David, the first things we started to talk was about how we both children of this frontier society, like modernist, progressive. We all believe in, production and expansion and all of this shit actually that is killing us now because we cannot keep expanding in a limited planet. That's very, very clear. And also I briefly want to say that technology, of course, could be like technology of torture, technology of surveillance, technology of, violence, and as well technology could be technology of care. But the very interesting thing that our two previous discussions was about economy. And in a way, economy, how we understand it now, is the technology of value assigning. That's what money is. And money is technology, first of all. So I just want to link what we're doing in St. Vincent to our next project in Nairobi, Kibera. Kibera is like huge slum that is 1 million people living on 6% of the territory of Nairobi, that is Kenya, East Africa. It's also a place where United Nations is moving now, so it's become like a really hub for many, many things going on. So the guys from Nairobi Art District, they moved their parade to October from December to correlate with our carnival. So now we're going to produce it together. And so that's would be for us a new way to experiment with all of these technologies, from rituals, like it's also a technology, of course, as David was saying, humans, ritual creating creatures, we are the ritual creating creatures, to money creation, to costume creation. And yeah, it's very exciting. And if I would have more time, that I don't now, I would describe more what we're gonna do. But to talk and to maybe ask everybody here about ideas how to do that, it looks like what is our challenge will be if we create these nodes like St. Vincent Prison, where we can kind of bring different type of technology that is easy to share, like spirulina or 3D printer or mycelium, let's say, or, textile printing things. So 10,000 different technologies. How can we make it going? Because the biggest problem of all this art collective and NGOs and so on, it's like done by professional people who have grants or, some kind of assignment to do it once, and then it's die. It's like 99% of the cases. So if it's really the task is to create this kind of autonomous zones that will accumulate this technology, will have an intense like motivation to keep them and share them. So that's the piece of technology that I'm kind of missing now. So I personally myself will try to, organize, and DJI, I hope other people in DJI too will help me to organize a constant connection with this prison team that looks like really interested in for this stuff that we brought to survive and to bring more stuff to them. But how to make it work? This is actually a challenge, and yeah, and so my current understanding, we will try to hook them up with the Kibera Art District in Nairobi, because they do have a running workshop. They have 36 workshops that produce different stuff in the middle of this informal economy. So maybe by connecting them and us acting as a glue, meanwhile thinking about the social technology that will kind of reinforce this connection, then bringing more and more nodes to the system that will mutually help each other, that's maybe how that could become a sustainable project. But that's my worry about that. So yeah, I just would like to ask if somebody have an opinion about this. Thank you.
Anyone?
But may I say something? Because it comes to my mind, we were talking about the dump, and maybe, I don't know if I'm wrong, but it's interesting to develop this kind of idea of this poetic technology as shared knowledge, because you don't need some specific tools that is the key. But I think, for example, I did a project last week that was urban foraging basically. So we picked up some these American pokeweed. So in that case was a collective urban foraging, and we completely changed this idea of the space. And in this case, the technologies was use some ancient technique to remake, to create a color, starting from collecting these berries near the train station. So also thinking in the project that Nika said, that it's this possibility to use something that already exists, and this is quite interesting to me.
Thank you, Giacomo. Any other ideas or things to share? Someone from the Institute or people here from St Vincent, Ronnie, someone?
I could say something because we were talking about essentially, poetic technologies. But I think for me, what's interesting is like, well, how do these technologies emerge, right? And to come back to Samuel, who was talking about braille printing, I mean, Samuel, correct me, but I think I read somewhere that braille emerged actually, the way it is right now, emerged originally from a person who was in the army who wanted to essentially at the time develop a language that helped people to soldiers to read notes in the night, right? And then he basically presented it to a blind school. He just went there with this kind of like, I have made this amazing thing that's probably going to benefit these useless blind people, is what he went in with. Of course, the blind people were not useless. I mean, in fact, they were very excited by the prospect of being able to access knowledge, which was very hard for them. And then Louis Braille went on to develop the system that this guy had made. He optimized it in a very brilliant way that made it much faster because it was about desire, right? So the desires, when we talk about poetic technologies, when we're even talking about the David Graeber Institute, I think it's about connecting the right kind of desires. The desire of the army officer was to forward his career and develop something that helped the military process, where the desire for the blind was to get access to knowledge. Correct me, Samuel, if I'm saying something wrong.
So I could spend an hour and probably bore some of you with a whole presentation on the history of tactile alphabets and tactile writing. The Charles Barbier, the night writing that you're referring to, the Napoleonic messaging, it's a little bit, it's a pseudo-urban legend, actually, but there's a really rich history of all these different competing tactile alphabets, some of which look very different from Braille, and it's a very interesting history. But there's a really rich history in tactile writing of generally these it's what you would think of as inclusive design, maybe broadly today, which is that many of these systems or the ones that had the longest staying power were designed by the people who wanted to use them,
by the people that use them.
And that's a recurring theme you see in generally in the disability field, is the things that work or co-designed or inclusively designed or prioritized, and the things that don't, or people that don't, that think they know what's good for another group. And that ties into a question here on the chat I'll briefly answer about what they would like to print on the 3D printer. So the disability group Voices of the Disabled, they are creating a priority list that tie into various aspects of schooling and education, cultural heritage, even things like 3D printed signs. We showed one earlier, because 3D printing has a tremendous potential for what we refer to as tactile learning. There have been a number of researchers who have worked in this area looking at 3D printing and learning with three-dimensional models versus some of the 2.5-dimensional models. So through our program, we've been doing things not just to impact schools, like, it could be a heart and a liver and various educational pieces. We've also been doing things like designing local heritage sites and culture sites, because you can if you live in France, you can order a Eiffel Tower model online and you have a little 3D model. But if you live in Uganda, you can't find a model of the Kasubi tombs. If you live in Kenya, you can't find a model of Fort Kenya. And this is a part of the history and culture of the area. So we've been starting to bring in this aspect of cultural accessibility, which we do a lot of in the US, into these programs. So the long and short of it is that we don't decide what's printed. Voices for the Disabled do, and the prison itself as well. They have a few printing needs and things that this is going to help just for their own institution while they're working with the printer. Yeah.
Thank you, Sam. Okay, so are there any more questions?
I think Shlomo wants.
Yeah, Shlomo, hello. Go ahead, please.
Hi, Andreas, can you hear me?
Yes.
Basically, I just wanted to, Samuel mentioned that the prisoners will decide. I just don't understand. Could you just elaborate, like, just examples of what are the limits of the 3D printing at the moment with the technology? Can you just give examples of what could be printed in theory?
You can print most things, and you can even look at abstracting. I'll give you some examples, I guess. So we work with a lot of museums in the US, and we incorporate 3D printing into a lot of our access and artwork. So you can, make exact replicas of stuff, right? There's a whole bucket of, it could be scanning a Roman statue is an example. Let's scan a Roman statue and do a 3D print. You can also do things like more daily living applications. Here's a 3D printed street map that shows buildings and street names and intersections on a very cheaply printed model. There are even websites where you can generate your own maps just by inputting an address. You can reduce something that's huge into something small. This is Carnegie Hall in New York, where it's a design of the building that's been designed specifically for tactile exploration. And a lot of that is reducing the complexity as well, so it's not too cluttered. So the disability organization that is going to be prioritizing what they're looking for, they are aware of all the different ways. We visited with them. We've shown them all the different ways that 3D printing can align with their goals, which is more effective teaching tools in classrooms, accessibility in daily life, accessibility in arts and culture, and then we tie those requests to the output of the prison program.
Yeah, if I'm also may say, Shlomo, so the original, when we come last time to the prison, what they were very excited about was in a way a desire for money, I would say. So they immediately, like starting from our driver who drove us to prison, who previously worked as a prison guard himself, he was saying, oh my God, so now prison can pay like 1 cent for every plastic trash bottle that people start to collect and bring to prison to sell them. So then the prison will shred these bottles with the machine that now they have, and then they will feed this plastic to the 3D printer, and then they can print, as Simon said, anything. They can print glasses, or they can print, art projects that we can send them, for example, and then they can participate. For example, they can print unique masks for our carnival in Kibera in October that will be drawn and designed by the famous artists around the world who will become a part of this competition. Meanwhile, the people in St. Vincent will get money for collecting the bottles. Prisoners will get money for producing the masks, and we will use them in a carnival. And then it will be like, wildest fantasy art exhibition in some fancy museum with like some crazy masks made from whatever, maybe not only plastic, maybe mycelium. Maybe it will be this giant sculpture that you guys showed in the Berlin Biennale. Maybe we can recreate it in Kibera, or you would advise us something else. So that's what would be like, I think, the ideal life cycle of that project.
Can I ask you, Nika? I have a question about this because a lot of things are produced in prison, right? I mean, a lot of things are produced in prison because prisoners are used as, well,
like a free labor, yeah.
Yes. So, I mean, what I'm interested in is not as, I'm kind of interested, perhaps not necessarily. I understand that money is definitely a desire for, a lot of people, and certainly for people to survive. But for me, I'm kind of like interested in what can we do to shift that desire to something else? Because here you have tools that are being provided to do anything in the world that you could do. And what we might think to do is produce maybe a cheap souvenir for, I don't know, like, I'm not saying that they're going to do that, but maybe what I think is we produce a souvenir for St. Vincent for all the tourists. And I'm just kind of hoping that, how do we get the technology to trigger the people to actually, engage with their deepest desires? And what are they? I'm not even sure. What are the desires? When you're sitting in a prison as a prisoner, what happens to your desires? What happens to your state of mind? Are you actually, when you're seeing and I'm interested in knowing from the people in St. Vincent, when you actually met the prisoners, what was their response to you? Like in the sense of, were they like, well, and no disrespect to all you guys, but you're a bunch of white guys who went into a Caribbean prison. And, I'm kind of interested in what was that interaction like? How were you perceived? And what did they say? And what is their desire with this technology? Because I'm kind of like wondering, we want this to be something transformative at a very human level for everybody. And I feel like everybody can
that's
come
very
up with
understandable. But
things, right?
I also want to say that actually it was a lot of choices where to start to work in St. Vincent, and prison was the best one. To my, I'm really convinced in that, because there is 250 men who are really bored, who have nothing to do. And in the same time, it's a very special prison. They are like walking around, they grow their own food. So compared to normal Western prisons, they're in a better way. But it's also, they don't need to make money, compared to the NGOs, any businesses, whatever you give to the NGO, there would be no wild technology there, no wild fantasies, because they immediately, when we only start to talk about spirulina, we make, with Andris, we make this workshop with pasta producing, like people would just come and say, oh, can you bring it to us? And that will be exclusive for us in the Caribbean. Nobody knows how to grow that in St. Vincent. And I was like, wait a minute. That was like a different idea. Like, you have to share, So that's one thing. And another is, Andres will probably tell it. There is already exists a workshop in this prison with the traditional technology of waving something from the grass. And there is an activist there who set up the system in which prisoners are getting paid. So it's good for them in every possible way. There's economic benefit, but also they are like really interested. They were really interested in learning stuff and, getting new skills. The guy I saw in photographs that Andres just showed, and maybe Andres correct me, this guy was an architect, the inmate, the tall guy. He also was talking with me in Alistair Pervin, the architect. He helped us to think through the material, how to realize the playground in St. Vincent. what to use for. I think it's the same guy, am I right?
Yeah, exactly. No, they have different projects in the prison already. And I think one of these aspects, how to look at this would be this aspect that Nika mentioned and I mentioned in the beginning of creating a circular kind of economy, which is where different actors are involved and where each one benefits from that. The prison has already some projects. For example, there is a vetiver grass weaving project, but the vetiver grass is also, I will call it technology, that helps to diminish the coastal erosion. So when you plant it on the slopes, it makes the ground stronger. And so with the rains and other things, it doesn't go down. So, and also for some coasts, they use it there. And then from this grass, they can weave things that they can then kind of create and sell as souvenirs or artifacts. And this project is very successful already. It exists since many years in the prison. So we want to kind of, we were interested also, of course, that this technology that we would provide would create a similar kind of circle, you know. And so there will be a follow-up from our side, from the side of Samuel. This is not that we are just leaving some kind of tool there and then they do what they want. So the idea is to create this kind of feedback, also to have a feedback about how it is going, what kind of tool. They asked us a lot of questions. They asked us about the possibilities, what can be printed. They asked us also how to do it. They wanted to learn the software. They want to learn this craft somehow. And then they will come up maybe with a list of items that they need there specifically, which is ridiculous if we would go there and say, oh, guys, now you print this. Like, I mean, we want this feedback from the prisoners as well, apart from putting them already in touch maybe with another institution here in St. Vincent, with whom they can have a dialogue so that they can then bring up also their own needs. And so this is the whole idea, that it's not just us bringing some abstract tool somewhere, but that we kind of connect with the local context. And it's our third time here. We really listen to them before like actually bringing the physical machine. So now there will be a follow-up of this as well. There is one more question. Just let me see it.
I know we're already over time, but
Yes,
I just
exactly.
want to ask, yeah, if because what really we need and what this prison need, we need projects more or less. We need somehow like working settings. We need to come up there and say, for example, let's think through how to now send them the mycelium, combine it with like, you know, plastic 3D printer stuff, and then use it somewhere else. So they will become a part of that kind of alternative economy, you know, and put together a different initiative. So they have their own very specific local economy. Like I was saying that immediately, like poor people in St. Vincent would gladly collect bottle if somebody will buy it from them, and they really need a tiny amount of money, and the prison will pay them. The prison has money, it has government fund. So that's economic part already would be working without us interfering. What we need to invent, and that's partly was my hope for this brainstorming party assembly, is can we actually come up with the ideas of what can we ask them that will be desirable for us? Because, you know, like all this accusation of white people coming to some poor place in the third world countries is because, you know, like we are bringing them something that we think they need. But actually, we come to St. Vincent because we were trying to find a good place, better than the one where we're living, you know. So we actually want a lot of things from them, and I think it's a healthy way of looking. So can we actually fantasize? What do we want? What we may want from them? Imagine if this prison would be our workshop. What do we want to produce? Do you guys know some artists that has an ideas what would be produced in this prison?
And I also think that's
Zasha?
about, yeah, there's maybe two levels. So one is this poetic level. We should collect ideas and then exchange them, and then we could arrive to a practical level how to make that happen. Sorry, I interrupted someone.
Valentina, I think.
I think Sasha, no, I think Sasha is
Yeah,
waiting
I
to
don't know
say
how to put my
something.
hand up, but
Yeah.
today, so I did it the old-fashioned. Now I wanted to say something. I mean, what you were saying just made me think that sustainability as a desire from Nika, and then maybe one way of answering that was what Andris was saying about how you know that is somehow the answer maybe to that desire. How does one create agency of the user, right? And I'm just trying to think, is sustainability such an important desire? Because I'm just trying to, and I don't want to be contrarian just for the point of it, but then how does one do, I mean, maybe the one-off project has something of one's own desire embedded in it as something maverick, crazy, something full of desire. And maybe the sustainability of that gets us trapped into this NGO human rights discourse ideas, where we have to maybe extract ourselves at this point in time in the world from those models, which are failed.
I think it's really important, but I mean sustainability differently. I really want to correct myself. Probably I misused the word. So Kibera in Nairobi, it's an example of how NGOs are disaster, because what are they doing and what is unsustainable? Because it's one of the poorest places in the world, they are all coming there, quickly do the workshop, famously, giving every participant some kind of certificate of the one workshop or another, and then leaving, And if you come, if just the people in Kibera will get the money that the people who come to make a workshop spend on their tickets, on their restaurants in Nairobi, or get paid, Kibera will become like really middle class place, because it's like a pouring money from all around the world. But it just the way how they distribute the money is going to this NGO industrial complex. So when I mean sustainability, I mean something else, because also some people do a good job in Kibera. They come and they build buildings, or they build like this. There is a great NGO there that's built bathrooms, public bathrooms, because in Kibera, in order to go to the bathroom, many people use what calls flying toilet. That's mean the plastic bag. So you pee or poop in a plastic bag and then you like throw it away, So, and that's how they live. So if somebody is actually building bathrooms for free, that's sustainable, because then the people can use them for a long time. So what I mean about I don't know, unsuccessful way of ending up the project in prison, if we just leave, they use this 3D printer for a couple of weeks. We didn't finalize the spirulina farm creation, and then that's all die. That's, of course, a disaster. So the first thing is prevent that from happening. And then the second step is to make something beautiful and strange out of that. Maybe they can do this laboratory of care that Koshika was dreaming of, where they can create something like really new. Like, I don't know, maybe they come and do like playgrounds where they grow spirulina. That's the guy, they're like quite professional architect. So that's what I mean by wild fantasies and sustainability. I don't know why don't you like this word, Zasha?
It's used very much, I guess, in the business world, so that's one reason. But the other maybe is that I also appreciate the one-off desired work that happens because an individual desires it, meets a community, does something. And I think it might, if it's meant to live, it will. And if not, it will die. But then at least it locks desire into the act. And maybe that's one way to get out of the NGO way of thinking. I'm thinking with you. I don't have a view. I'm just thinking aloud that I don't mind so much the one-off I'm thinking, because it's about chance, and it's about who's there and what friendship is formed. And we don't know where those friendships will go, but they will go somewhere if there's true desire behind it. And I think the user, like when Clark House happened, the first thing we said is, this is for us and for nobody else, And I think that gave it 12 years, and it did end. But yeah.
Did it?
Yeah.
How did it end? Just disappear?
As all collectives, for many reasons, but I would say primarily political ones. We realized that we had long discussions, so that's why I can speak for the group. We decided to close it when simple things like making a poster not even a campaign, like artworks in small tea shops that were somehow very pro-Muslim, but not even, you just would understand. When a Muslim shopkeeper said to us, "You're not putting this in my store." And we said, "Why?" And because he's a friend of ours, we always did. He said, "People will think I put it and they will beat me up for this." And when we realized we couldn't even do that much on the street, the reason for us to all be Clark House, it was better to kill it than to continue some kind of fake version of what it had been. So that was
Interesting. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I understand, and thank you for contributing, Zasha, everyone. So if there are last questions, because I think we should close, and then maybe next time, this format of assembly is very also interesting and useful in order to share ideas. I think that's maybe is needed, urgently needed, it seems, from a lot of questions that pop up. And it can become also a tool how to kind of horizontally try to come up with new ideas. Where could we go from here?
I just want to answer or comment on Zasha, the last one, if possible. So, okay, I think it was, it sounds like a defeat. I'm sorry, this closing up, because it's like harsh politically in India, and it's not a good time. I just like with, for example, with this St Vincent prison, for me, when I come to St Vincent and when I'm going now to East Africa, it's I'm trying to find a place of hope. Every way is like really desperation and depression. I can't live like that, I do want to have like a hope, and I want to invest my time, sorry for the business language, in order to build this kind of nodes and try to sustain them for whatever means possible, to create these communities where that will be sustainable. In sustainable, I mean, where we will create some friends where we can come and live, can exchange, do art projects that will be outside also or in parallel or together with existing structures that is now collapsing in front of us, everything, academia, art world, whatever they call democracies, it's all falling apart. So we do need
Which is maybe going back to the critical studies department or the David Graeber Institute or Museum of Care. These are where I find the hope in the sense of the relation, the ability to not feel alone with one's concerns, but to be able to,
but
have a circuitry.
But so how, but it's very unstable. Like we were like, with Andris, exchanged lots of messages how to set up the Zoom. So we need to build the architecture beneath that structures that will be more,
a lot of labor, emotional labor.
But also food, also, like a production of materials, like a cups, like, I don't know, or like, just art production outside. So that's, I think, very important.
All right, so maybe on this note, I think it would be good to wrap up today. Thank you so much, everyone, for having participated. Thank you, Zasha. Thank you, Valentina. Thank you also to
Thank you.
Giacomo and to all the people here. And I hope that we can repeat it, Nika, maybe if you find it useful, because I think maybe it's good to-
Saturday, we have Carnival Zoom, yeah?
Right, and
Right.
so thank you so much to everyone, and see you all soon. And yeah. And this concludes
you.
our week here in St. Vincent. See you back in Europe.
Good luck. Bye all.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.